The first day of the Naruto War Arc was kinda rough. If you don't count the Kaguya Black Zetsu stuff, which is not canon anyways, it's the worst part of the series. There are a lot of fights you don't really care about happening at the same time. You don't even get to see most of those fights playing out to their completion, because they mostly happen off screen, so you don't get invested in any of them. And the fights you see happening to completion are like Ginkaku and Kinkaku versus Darui and Samui, or Ginkaku versus the Inoshikacho team, or Asuma versus Inoshikacho, which is a bad fight because Asuma should have fought somebody else. There's the Mifune versus Hanzo fight, which is actually not terrible, but it's a fight between two characters we don't really care about and just come out of nowhere. Like, no one cares about Mifune, and even Hanzo. And yet they have a major fight in the first day of the war, instead of you giving development for more interesting characters from the Konoha 12, for example. No, let's get development for Mifune. So yeah, the first day of the war, not the greatest part of Naruto. It is way shorter in the manga though, so it makes it much more bearable because the anime is just filled with filler. However, at the end of the first day of the war arc, there is a very interesting scene. Probably the best scene slash fight in that whole day of the war, which is when Obito slash Madara slash the Masked Man shows up and attacks the Alliance on the beach using the Gedo Mazo. Now that fight is actually quite interesting because everything seems fine, the Alliance managed to seal many of the Edo Tensei and subdue others, but then out of nowhere, the Masked Man appears and summons the Gedo Mazo, which roars. And then you're like, oh, finally, we're not fighting against fodder Edo Tensei characters we don't care about, or they're completely nerfed like Kakuzu was. We're actually facing somebody interesting that has some substance to the character. The stakes have been raised. And even though the Choji versus Asuma fight before wasn't exactly amazing, it didn't give Choji this amazing conclusion to his character arc, at least when he acquires his massive butterfly wings. That's a cool scene. Choji uses that power to become gigantic again and faces the freaking Gedo Mazo statue alongside Choza, his dad. And honestly, that is pretty cool. Well, eventually the Gedo Mazo defeats them and blows them away, but at least there was something that those two characters could do together. And it's also interesting to see a father and son dynamic in the battlefield when it's not a main character, because the main characters don't really have dads, so they don't have this dynamic very often. I mean, Naruto got that with Minato in the war arc because Minato was brought back as an Edo Tensei, so I guess, yeah, Naruto got that. But it just makes sense to see the characters that can turn huge fighting against this huge Gedo Mazo statue. I know a lot of people don't like the big things in Naruto when they fight against each other, but Naruto has been having kaiju battles ever since the end of the Chunin exams when Naruto fought against Gaara with a massive toad and Gaara was using Shukaku. And as Choji and Choza are fighting the Gedo Mazo, Obito's trying to get Ginkaku and Kinkaku's chakras, which were sealed by the Alliance in those tools. You know, in the day before, those fights were terrible, but Obito's after the chakras so he can complete the Gedo Mazo. Well, not complete it completely per se, but he can produce the 10 tails if he gets his hands on Ginkaku and Kinkaku's 9 tails as chakras, so that's why he's there. And we see a brief altercation between Obito and Shikamaru. Obito even recognizes Shikamaru's intellect because Shikamaru deduces what Obito was there for. That Obito allowed Edo Ginkaku to be used during the day so that they could fight against the Alliance and provide some military support to the White Zetsu army. But now that they were sealed, he intends to get their chakras to seal in the Gedo Mazo, which he just so happens to be using at the very moment. And there's also one small addition to the scene, which actually is not that small, and people don't pay attention to it at all, which is the fact that Shikamaru's Shadow Possession Jutsu is a counter to the phasing ability of Kamui, which makes sense. Obito can make himself intangible from physical attacks, but he cannot do anything about his shadow, so Shikamaru's shadow should be able to connect itself to Obito's shadow and paralyze him. And that's exactly what Shikamaru does, paralyzing Obito. And most people don't really understand how major this is, because a lot of people, me included, say that Kamui is one of the most broken abilities in the Narutoverse. Being able to phase through attacks is simply too OP. And whenever we see an ability that can counter Kamui, like Flying Raijin for example, or even Kakashi's Kamui, that's a big deal because pretty much nobody can do that. We always praise Conan for almost killing Obito with her paper bomb ocean, and that was a jutsu that took her a lot of prep time. And now we see Shikamaru catching Obito with his shadow possession with no prep time or anything, it's just a jutsu that works against Obito. Which does make a lot of sense. As I said before, Obito can phase through things with his body, but we can't do anything with his shadow. And because his actual projection / image always appears in the real world, even if he's phasing, so long as his entire body is not being consumed by something he's phasing through, because then he just gets completely transported into Kamui, and that's what happens when Naruto finally unmasks him. There are going to be parts of Obito's body that are still going to be physically present in the real world dimension and not in the Kamui dimension that are going to project shadows, which Shikamaru can use to take advantage on. Obito manages to get rid of Shikamaru's shadow possession very quickly by commanding the Gedo Mazo to stomp on Shikamaru, which would have probably killed him if Choji didn't save him. But that's still a big deal, and honestly, people didn't really remark too much on it. Yeah, we managed to catch Madara in the shadow possession jutsu, but it's whatever, man. Nobody cares. Madara simply collects the chakra of Ginkaku and Kinkaku in the ceiling implements there and leaves after that. Which, yeah, that was his goal. It didn't take too long to accomplish it, and once he got that chakra, he just fled. That makes sense, right? That whole thing took a little bit more than a chapter, and way less than a chapter if you don't count what's going on in the headquarters at the same time. And it was pretty cool because it was an antagonist we care about fighting against characters we care about, like Shikamaru and Choji. And also several other characters from the Alliance at the same time. Like Ino was there, Darui was helping out against Madara too. Tenten was present in that battlefield as well, but she was exhausted from using the Sage of Six Paths tool, so I guess she couldn't do much. She never can. That was the best part of the first day of the war. It was that time when we finally understood, oh, okay, bad things could happen to our main characters here. This masked man guy doesn't joke around, because before that, when Kakuzu is getting blitzed by Izumo and Kotetsu, it doesn't really make us feel threatened by the antagonists very much. And the White Zetsu army, yeah, that's an army of fodder characters that are supposed to be destroyed by whoever touches them, especially when it comes to the main characters there. Like, yeah, 40,000 members of the Alliance died in the first day, but nobody cares because we don't know who they were. They're just background characters, and even if 40 billion of them had died, we wouldn't care. Especially because most characters they were fighting against were White Zetsus or kind of boring Edo Tensei characters. And the fight that ensues is pretty cool, with the Gedo Mazo versus Choji and Choza and the Masked Man himself against Shikamaru. However, even though that was a cool part of the first day of the war, there's still a problem with it. Which is that it was too short. That fight was way too short. As I said, not even a chapter. Like, sure, Obito got what he wanted and left, but he could have made that a little bit more difficult. Yes, we understand Obito is much stronger than anybody in that battlefield from the Alliance, but because there were so many people there, and Shikamaru was involved, who had a counter to Kamui with a shadow possession, you could have made that much more interesting if a lot of characters helped Shikamaru out, coming up with strategies and using his shadow possession to try and counter Kamui. Like, oh, Shikamaru, you got him in your shadow possession, now let's hit him for 5 minutes straight until he can no longer phase. Choji, Choza, make sure the Gedo Mazo can't approach him, make sure it cannot interfere with the fight we're having with the masked man down here. Kitsuchi from the Stone Village, which used the Sandwich Mountain Jutsu on the Gedo Mazo, could also help out, and he could probably create stone golems to fight alongside Choji and Choza as well. So you could have this two-way fight between the Gedo Mazo versus Choji, Choza, and Kitsuchi, and Obito versus Shikamaru, Darui, and whoever else Kishimoto wants to throw in that fight. Because, yeah, a lot of characters are going to have to fight against Obito for the fight to be, you know, kind of interesting. But because Shikamaru has a very good counter for Kamui, which people don't mention, this fight could have given Obito a little bit of difficulty. Perhaps even forcing Obito to use his Rinnegan powers for the first time if they manage to go through the time limit of Kamui, that's 5 minutes. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying that they should beat Obito in that instance, definitely not, but it could have certainly made that specific moment of the war arc even more interesting, especially if you include more characters alongside Shikamaru there. And imagine how chaotic that could get as well once the Gedo Mazo releases several Edo Tenseis that were subdued before, like Dan and Kakuzu. It could just add to the chaos in the battlefield in this moment of desperation, which would make the fight more exciting and tense. Watch this other video right here for more cool Naruto content. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also ring notifications. Those things are important, and it only takes you 5 seconds, so please do them. And thank you so much for watching.